In the year 1240, the Mediterranean world was a place of clashing faiths, restless seas, and brutal encounters between Christians and Muslims. Among those caught in this turmoil was Saint Serapion of Algiers, a man whose name would be remembered not for conquest or riches, but for the horror of his death and the steadfastness of his faith. He was a Mercedarian friar, a member of an order founded to ransom Christians taken captive by Muslim pirates. The seas at that time were treacherous with raids and retaliations, and those who sailed them knew the risks. Serapion accepted those dangers willingly, convinced that the salvation of souls mattered more than the safety of his own body. Accounts from the Mercedarian chronicles describe Serapion as a man of quiet strength, deeply committed to his vows, and unshakable in his devotion. His order had been born out of necessity, for thousands of Christians fell into slavery during that century, and the Mercedarians vowed not only to negotiate ransom, but also to offer themselves as substitutes if the ransom could not be paid. It was a vow of extraordinary sacrifice, and Serapion would ultimately live it out in the most extreme way imaginable. He was captured during one of these perilous missions, likely betrayed or overtaken by raiders who saw him as both a prize and a problem. In the eyes of his captors, Serapion was more than a mere prisoner. He was a stubborn symbol of a faith they demanded he abandon. When ransom negotiations failed or broke down, they turned to punishment as a message. Torture was not uncommon, but the method chosen for Serapion was designed to break both his body and his spirit. Witnesses describe a slow, deliberate torment. He was brought before them, commanded to renounce his faith, and when he refused, they condemned him to death in a manner both cruel and symbolic. They nailed his hands and limbs to a wooden structure, pinning him against a wall and a grotesque parody of crucifixion. The medieval chroniclers emphasized that it was not a quick execution. It was staged to prolong his suffering, to leave him suspended in agony, unable to escape. Each breath a struggle, each moment a test of endurance. The body of Serapion was left exposed, nailed upright as if mocked by the very stance of Christ's crucifixion. His captors meant for him to recant in the face of unbearable pain, but instead, his silence and endurance only sharpened their cruelty. He hung there for hours, perhaps longer, bleeding, his muscles tearing, his weight dragging him downward against the nails. Accounts speak of the moment when his strength failed, when he sagged upon the iron that fixed him to the wall, his flesh ripping under the pressure. Yet, until the very end, he never abandoned the faith that had brought him there. The chronicles tell us that Serapion finally succumbed to exhaustion, blood loss, and the torment of his wounds. His death was not swift, not merciful, but agonizing and drawn out. Those who later recovered his body were confronted with a sight both terrible and sacred, for the wounds themselves became testimony to the price he had paid. The Mercedarians recorded these details not to dwell on the gore, but to preserve his memory as a man who had embraced his vow with absolute fidelity. His martyrdom echoed through Spain and beyond for the Christian faithful. Serapion's ordeal became more than just a story of brutality. It was a beacon of unshakable faith in the face of terror. In an age when religion defined identity and allegiance, his death was framed as the ultimate act of loyalty to Christ. Centuries later, he was canonized, and his name entered the litany of saints whose deaths bore witness to their devotion. But beyond their religious veneration, his execution remains a window into the darker realities of the medieval world. It reminds us that torture was not just a punishment, but a tool of intimidation, a performance meant to send a message to the living. In Serapion's case, the message was clear: abandon your faith or die in agony. Yet the unintended message, preserved in the records of his order, was the reverse: that conviction could outlast cruelty, and that the memory of a martyr could outlive the power of those who killed him. Even today, the martyrdom of Saint Serapion of Algiers is not remembered as legend, but as history, documented in the canonization processes and the surviving chronicles of his time. His story continues to provoke reflection, not only on faith and sacrifice, but on the depths of human violence. The image of his body, stretched against the wall, nailed and broken, forces us to confront the brutal ingenuity of medieval punishment. Yet at the same time, it invites us to consider how such suffering could be transformed into a legacy of defiance, remembered for centuries after the cries of his executioners had faded. The bloody martyrdom of Saint Serapion is thus more than a tale of one man's death. It is a testament to how the medieval world fused faith, violence, and memory into stories that would shape history itself. His agony, meticulously recorded by those who honored him, ensured that the horror inflicted on him did not vanish into silence. Instead, it lived on, carried by the voices of survivors, chroniclers, and the church, until his sacrifice became not just a tragedy, but a symbol of endurance that still echoes through the centuries. The cries of Serapion still echoed in the chamber as the pirates stepped back, admiring their cruelty. The hammer had driven nails through his flesh into the stone wall, each strike vibrating through his bones. He had been stretched wide, arms outstretched, hands pierced, and body trembling with exhaustion. The pirates thought his resolve would falter quickly. They had seen many men beg for release, renounce their god, or promise riches and betrayals in exchange for mercy. Yet Serapion, gasping with pain, whispered only prayers. His lips quivered, not with pleas for life, but with recitations of the Psalms. Hours turned into a day. The damp air of the dungeon carried the stench of blood, sweat, and rot. His fellow captives, chained nearby, could not bear to watch. Some turned away, whispering that his suffering was beyond human endurance. Yet others drew strength from his silence, from the way he bore torment without curse or denial. Word spread among the prisoners that Serapion was not breaking. It was said that in his eyes there remained a strange calm, as if his spirit had already lifted beyond the dungeon, beyond the pirates, beyond the iron spikes holding his body. The jailers grew restless. They tightened his bindings and tore into his wounds to make him scream, dragging iron hooks across his flesh. But the cry they longed for never came. Instead, Serapion told them stories of mercy, recounting how his order, the Mercedarians, gave their lives and resources to free captives like him. He told them that redemption was greater than cruelty, and freedom of the soul was worth more than freedom of the body. His words unsettled them, though they laughed outwardly. In the silence of night, some whispered among themselves that he was mad, while others admitted he was something more than mortal. Days passed, and his body weakened. Blood crusted on his wounds, and fever set in. He trembled violently but still endured. He was not given water, nor food, except scraps tossed mockingly at his feet, impossible to reach in his nail position. His skin split further each time he moved, and still, he whispered prayers. One surviving account from fellow prisoners tells how, on the third night, a guard swore he heard voices in the chamber, as if unseen monks were chanting alongside Serapion's labored prayers. The guard fled in terror, claiming spirits had entered the dungeon. By the fourth day, his tormentors decided that death should come slowly but decisively. They bound his legs with cords and twisted them tight until the flesh tore. They broke his joints one by one, hammering his limbs until his body contorted grotesquely against the wall. The pain was unimaginable, but witnesses said he bore it with a stillness that only inflamed the pirates further. Finally, in a final act of humiliation, they ripped his garments, leaving him exposed, mocked, and bleeding in the cold air. And then, silence. His breathing slowed. His lips moved faintly. One prisoner later wrote that Serapion's last words were not curses, not pleas, but the name of Christ spoken with devotion. His head fell, his body hung limp on the wall, and his spirit left. When his captors returned to the dungeon, they found the scene unnerving. The body was still nailed to the stone, yet his face was serene, as if sleep had overtaken him rather than agony. They tried to jeer, but some among them fell into an uneasy hush. What they thought would be a spectacle of broken faith had instead become a testament carved in blood. They buried his body hastily, But the Mercedarians never forgot. Through word of mouth, letters, and eventually official chronicles, the story of his martyrdom spread. In the decades that followed, Serapion's sacrifice was retold in monasteries across Spain. Monks would whisper of the friar who chose death rather than deny his lord, who faced pirates with nails and iron rather than betray his vows. His canonization documents, written centuries later, preserve the brutality of his execution, not as morbid fascination, but as evidence of his faith. Paintings from later centuries show him suspended, arms spread, nailed against wood or stone. His white robe stained red with martyr's blood. His image became one of suffering endured with grace, a faith tested by the cruelest of human inventions. Why did his story echo through time? Perhaps because it embodied the conflict of the age. In the 13th century, Christian Europe was torn between crusades, piracy, and the constant clash of faiths. Captivity was common, ransom and slavery were realities for countless men and women. But the Mercedarians, founded to redeem captives, lived by a radical vow to offer themselves in exchange for others if ransom could not be paid. Serapion lived and died by that vow. His martyrdom became proof of his order's devotion, and his blood was seen as a seal upon their mission. Yet beyond religious circles, the tale resonates differently. It reveals the lengths of human cruelty. How torture was not just a method of death, but of dominance, of breaking the spirit. To nail a man alive against a wall, to leave him to thirst, hunger, fever, and despair. It was not meant only to kill, but to erase his will. And yet, Serapion's will was never erased. In that, he triumphed over his tormentors. Modern historians debate the exact details of his execution. Some records suggest crucifixion-like torture, others emphasize the nailing and breaking of limbs. Yet, all agree on one point. He was martyred brutally, and his refusal to recant became the defining feature of his life's end. Whether one views him as saint or simply victim, the historical truth remains he endured suffering beyond imagination in the name of what he believed was eternal truth. As centuries passed, churches bore his name. His feast day was remembered. Artists such as Francisco de Zurbarán immortalized his martyrdom and haunting canvases, showing his body limp against wood, eyes closed, skin pale, and wounds vivid. His memory inspired not only monks but countless faithful who sought strength in the example of one who faced torment without surrender. His image hung in monasteries where friars knelt to pray, a reminder of the cost of their vows. But even outside devotion, Serapion's story holds a mirror to history. It forces us to ask, what do people truly believe in strongly enough to die for? In an age where faith, identity, and survival clashed violently, Serapion's death was both tragedy and testament. His body was broken, yet his story became unbreakable, carried across borders and centuries. Now, in our time, looking back at the medieval chronicles, it is not only the horror that shocks us, but the endurance of his spirit. Torture chambers, pirate dungeons, nails and hammers, they belong to a world steeped in violence. But the echo of one man's refusal to betray his faith still speaks. It whispers of conviction that no torment could destroy. Serapion of Algiers remains a symbol carved into history. His name may not be as famous as kings or generals, yet his death left an imprint more lasting than their fleeting victories. His story survived because it was written in pain, remembered in prayer, and painted in art. Every retelling breathes life into his final hours, making sure they are not forgotten in the dust of medieval cruelty. And so, his martyrdom is not only a relic of the past, but a living story of courage. As you hear his tale, you step into the dungeon, feel the iron nails, smell the blood and damp stone, hear the whispered prayers among the screams. You stand witness to a moment when human cruelty tried to erase faith, but instead carved it deeper into the world. If you have reached this point, remember that stories like these connect us to the endurance of the human spirit. They remind us that history is not only battles and rulers, but also men who hung nailed to walls, refusing to surrender. If the story of Saint Serapion's bloody martyrdom gripped you, share it, spread it, and let others see the echoes of faith and cruelty that shaped our world. Subscribe for more revelations from history's hidden chambers, where the past speaks not with words alone, but with blood, iron, and unyielding resolve.